Integration and Compensation webinar. These are lightning rounds and discussions of recent distributed system planning and DER integration publications. My name is Kirsten Brooklas. I'm Senior Managing Director at NASEO, the National Association of State Energy Officials, and I'm excited to welcome you today. Also together with my colleagues, Danielle Sass-Burnett, Jeff Loiter, Jessica Diaz, from NARUC, the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners. Next slide, please. Before we get started, I wanted to first of all go over the agenda. But first of all, just frame a little bit of why we're here today. Most of you states, either from the state energy offices, the public utility commissions, or the consumer advocates have engaged with us over the last few years on DER integration and compensation through various means, webinars, cohorts. And a lot of you have also kind of voiced some of the challenges you're all facing. And so together with a great team from the national labs, as well as from DOE, over the past year and months, they've come up with a lot of great resources that were just released at the end of 2024, early 2025, that are kind of in response to a lot of the things that we've heard while we're working with the states. So today we've invited all the authors of the great resources to give lightning round presentations. Each of the authors will talk a little bit, like about 3 minutes per report. So we'll have the first 40 minutes with Lisa Schwartz from LBNL, Sean Murphy, Natalie Mims-Frake, Guillermo Pereira, and Sydney Forrester, as well as Paul DeMartini from the Newport Consulting Group and Jen Downing from the Department of Energy Loan Programs Office. And they will just very quickly and briefly talk about each of the great reports. And then if you have questions, please hold them. We'll then go to breakout rooms with the authors. That will be also about 40 minutes. At each of the authors or author pairs, we'll have a breakout room where you can join them to ask all the questions you would like about the resources or anything else DER integration and compensation related. You can move between rooms as desired. We'll give you further instructions later on, but basically, if you want to leave a room, you can just say leave and then don't leave the meeting, but just leave the room, come back to the main room, and then hop to the next room. So you can hop in between as many rooms as you want, and we'll give you sort of a halfway through the 40-minute warning in order for you to make sure that you hit all the rooms that you want. And then we'll just come back quickly at the end and have a bit of a closing where the authors that were in the breakouts rooms are just going to briefly talk a little bit about the discussion that they had. So before I hand it over to Lisa Schwartz, I just wanted to thank you all, the states that are on the line today, not just for being here today, but also for being engaged with NARUC and NASEO on these issues more broadly over the last few years. And then second of all, I just wanted to also thank the U.S. Department of Energy for their support of our NASEO NARUC's programming and some of these reports. This wouldn't have been possible with the great people at DOE and the national labs coming together to provide these resources for you all. So thank you so much. And with that, I will turn it over to Lisa Schwartz.
Thanks, Kirsten. And hello, everyone. I'm Lisa Schwartz with Berkeley Lab. We're really happy to be with you here today. We have a slew of reports that we're going to share with you that are recently published. And so we're looking forward to give you a little feel for this and any questions you have during the breakout rooms. I don't see the slides. Does everybody else see the slides?
If you go to the top and look at the tab, there's one that says Jessica Diaz. And if you click on that, then the slides will show up. Do you see that?
Thank you very much. All right, moving on. So our first recently published report that we're going to talk about is about state requirements. They could be from the legislature or from the utility regulators, the public utility commissions, identifying leading practices in 20 jurisdictions. So we cover goals and objectives for the requirements, the procedural elements, things like filing frequency and stakeholder engagement. We talk about forecasting loads and distributed energy resources. Hosting capacity analysis, which is the ability for a specific point on the distribution system to interconnect additional resources like solar without any additional upgrades. We talk about what is the current state of the distribution system? What's sort of your baseline? The grid modernization strategy, a grid needs assessment report of the near-term and long-term needs, typically over a 10-year horizon these days. And then we're looking at ways that distributed energy resources might be able to meet a subset of those needs through non-wires alternatives analysis. Certainly reliability and resilience and analyses. And then distribution planning is also a place where utilities can tee up pilots that may come in through regular tariff filings, but it's a way to tee them up in the context of a broader look at distribution planning needs. There are pilots as well as the coordination across planning processes. So this graph here in the report, the table shows the types of plans that are coordinated with distribution planning by state. So if you look at the right column, those icons indicate the level of coordination. So that ranges from simply referring to other proceedings or plans on the one hand to much more integrated, conducting modeling in both an iterative and integrated way across planning processes. Next slide, please. So complementing the report is an online catalog and data visualization. So this resource contains state requirements for electric utilities to file some kind of distribution plan in 20 U.S. jurisdictions. So it can range from a long-term look, a T&D improvement plan, where the utility may have some ability to get approval before making a major investment in some states, or it could be a full-on integrated distribution plan. The data visualization provides an interactive interface so that you can look at state-by-state requirements for the different kinds of plans the utilities file, the filing frequency, the planning horizon, distributed resource analyses, including non-wires alternatives, and hosting capacity analysis. There's also sort of detailed Google Sheet that you can pop up and even download, where you can see the legislative and regulatory requirements, proceedings and orders, and get to all those links. You can also see the plans that the utilities actually filed and the type of action that the regulatory commission took on the plan, whether it's, thanks very much for filing on the one hand to full-on approval in other places. Largely, these things are more sort of like acknowledged as opposed to like a full-on approval. We also cover what the state's planning goals and objectives are, either within the originating legislation, if there is any, or on the commission's own authority, what their objectives were. And we're looking at the term of the action plan, the stakeholder engagement provisions. I really appreciate the Public Utility Commissions that reviewed and validated this data for us so that, we're sure that it's accurate. And because links break over time, there's a document library of the sources we cite. Users also can create customized maps for embedding in their own web content, or with credit, of course, to Berkeley Lab, or exporting their documents. Say you're in a state that doesn't have distribution system planning requirements yet in terms of the publicly filed plans. You can take a look at this and you can create, a visual representation and gather a lot of information internally to present to the commission, to the state, and maybe get a conversation going. So importantly, an update is underway now to be completed next month. So take a look by the end of next month, and you'll see all new updated information for all of the states and territories. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Lisa. Hi, folks. This is Jeff Loiter with NARUC. I'm going to try to do the passing and introduction and thanking every of the speakers to move on to the next one. So thank you, Lisa. Next up, we have Sean Murphy. He's going to talk about 2 additional publications that he worked on. And apologies for the music from the timer. We're going to try to work that out and not disturb the speakers with that, because they do have a limited amount of time, but we want to make sure that they are not distracted as well. Sean, it's over to you.
Thanks, Jeff. And thanks, Lisa, for starting us off. So hi, everyone. I'm Sean Murphy. I'm an energy policy researcher at the Berkeley Lab. And the first paper that I'm going to provide an overview of is entitled The State of Demand Flexibility Programs and Rates. Utilities offer programs and rates that promote demand flexibility across the US, but in general, there's a lack of publicly available data that policymakers can reference to inform their design. This report addresses that gap by characterizing 148 programs and 93 rates across the US that promote demand flexibility. And by demand flexibility, we mean shedding or shifting demand in response to grid conditions. The programs that we studied in this paper largely involve Wi-Fi thermostats and batteries, though we also address programs that involve thermal storage, heat pumps, and building automation. We intentionally focused on this newer class of programs and didn't cover some long-standing sort of demand flexibility programs such as air conditioner direct load control and behavioral demand response. We were trying to focus on sort of what are the emerging practices. The rates that we studied had either a dynamic component in which the price of electricity changes in response to grid conditions, or a technology requirement. So an example of the dynamic rates that we were focused on could be a critical peak price or a variable peak price rate. And then this rate with a technology requirement could be a rate specific to battery storage. Our results cover a range of program and rate characteristics, including when and how frequently program and dynamic rate events may occur, the structure of program incentives and how they relate to the different demand flexibility technologies employed, as well as the range of incentive amounts offered in Wi-Fi thermostat and battery programs. Since we had more of those programs, we had more data to work with, and we were able to develop some analyses specific to those technologies. And to the extent possible, we analyzed the outcomes of programs, including their enrollment levels, demand reductions during events, and the cost of, say, peak demand. And for the rates, we analyzed event prices during critical peak price rates. Some of the key findings from the report include that demand flexibility programs right now are generally targeting summer afternoons when we often have our summer peaking systems because due to a lot of cooling load. In the top right, I have a figure that illustrates that across the different technology types, including thermostats and batteries, programs are often focused on those summer afternoons. In the bottom right, it shows another interesting results was how the incentive structures varied across the programs. Found that Wi-Fi thermostats were often using upfront retention incentives, so that's money to join and sort of money to stay enrolled. And then battery programs were more oriented towards using performance incentives that reward participants for the amount of demand that they provide. Overall, the report informs discussions on demand flexibility program and rate design, different program requirements, as well as providing useful inputs to estimating demand flexibility potential. And next slide, please. So the second report that I'll touch on is called Bridging the Gap on Data and Analysis for Distribution System Planning. While all utilities conduct distribution system planning activities, about 20 states require that utilities file some sort of plan with public utilities commissions. Utilities are conducting extensive analysis to develop these plans, but in most jurisdictions, regulators and stakeholders don't know what data are available and how to use that data to inform planning investments. This report aims to increase the understanding of the data, metrics, and analysis that regulators and stakeholders can ask for in distribution system planning proceedings. So for the 11 different distribution planning topics that we have on the right, we identify the data that utilities can report, describe how those data impact planning, and present examples of and best practices on utility data sharing. We also share insights from interviews that we conducted with 10 regulators, state energy offices, and utilities. Those conversations covered how utilities share data, and we discussed some of the issues that they've confronted in accessing and using the data. We also discussed how they've used information shared by utilities, as well as the impacts of data sharing on planning and decision making. Some of the key insights from those conversations include that regulators and stakeholders do value the extensive reporting in distribution system plans, but do confront some challenges due to data overload and a lack of standardized data. Some common uses of distribution system planning data include comparing historical, actual, and projected expenditures, tracking reliability performance, and reviewing and validating key modeling decisions. In parallel, we developed a data tool that organizes the data and metrics and analysis for each of the planning topics. And we've also published that alongside the report so that regulators and stakeholders, anyone involved in distribution system planning process, can easily identify what data are useful and then adapt the tool to their purposes. And with that, I can hand things back to you, Jeff.
Thanks so much, Sean. Really appreciate it. For those of you who are interested, the links are being put into chat as the presenters come along. Thank you to Kirsten for doing that. We'll maybe think of a way to make sure they get these out to people as a batch afterwards, maybe to send it to everybody who attended. So Natalie's up for the next 2 documents. Natalie, take it away. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff. So the first report or work products that I'm going to talk about are on virtual power plants, or VPPs. And we released 2 reports and an inventory in January. So the first report that we released is based on interviews with more than 20 different subject matter experts on VPPs. And it outlines actions that utilities and regulators can take to expand VPPs, and it's organized around successful designs, deployment, and operation. The report focuses on the role of leadership in successful VPP planning and implementation, grid and technology investments, and program planning and design. And the insights that we found included that strong leadership from within the utility is critical. A dedicated staff to plan and implement the VPP is important, and including cross-functional teams for both regulators and for utilities, given the number of silos that VPPs cross over. The development of a clear vision, goals, and terminology from both the commission and the utility is important to accelerating the success of VPPs. And interviewees also talked about the importance of making investments in software solutions and creating clear participation and communication protocols. The second work product that we created was the inventory. And this was created in response to some of the things we heard from our interviewees about the lack of consistent information available about who had VPPs and where they were located and what their characteristics were. So we created this spreadsheet. It has over 180 different VPP programs in it, along with 790 demand response and solar plus storage programs. And it has, for both of those categories, information on the location, who implements the program, the DER pipes that are included in it, and the capacity of the program. And we included the demand response and solar plus storage data in the inventory. It's on a separate tab from the VPP programs. But we included it as a way of thinking about if we are leveraging existing resources that we have on the ground today through existing demand response programs or solar plus storage, what the potential could be with VPPs and where those resources are located in the country. The third product that we created is a report that documents the virtual power plant profiles, which is what this graphic on the left side of the slide is, as well as talks about the approach and data that's included in the inventory. So the profiles we created in response also to the interviews, a lot of people told us that it's challenging to talk about VPPs because it means so many things to different people. And so we thought that we would create these profiles and they could be used as a starting point to facilitate clearer conversations between regulators and utilities and stakeholders to better understand what each person was talking about when they say a VPP. And then this report also includes an analysis. It describes what the inventory is and what the data sources are. And then it also includes analysis using the inventory and the data that's included in it. And for example, some of the findings from that included that investor-owned utilities are the primary implementer of VPPs today, and that they're generally focused on demand response or flexible load management strategies. We can go on to the next slide, please. The next report that I will talk about is a framework for DER compensation and cost allocation. This report outlines a framework, which is this figure that's in the top of the slide, to help regulators and utilities evaluate the opportunities for DERs to provide grid services and allocate DER costs to promote efficient use of distribution capacity and interconnection resources. So on the graphic on the right side of the slide, the framework has two primary components, a grid services tariff and an export tariff. The grid services tariff is used to compensate DERs for providing specific grid services based on performance requirements. And the export tariff addresses cost allocation and cost recovery. The report starts off talking about the challenges that the framework can overcome, and then it talks about the framework's design principles, which are that it's transparent and technology neutral and promotes operational and planning integration. It then talks about the grid service tariff structure, which is what's shown in the graphic on the bottom right side of the slide. And for each one of the grid services that's shown in that graphic, there is a description, a description of the grid service, a discussion of the performance expectation and timing attributes, and those all build on prior DOE work. As is shown in the graphic, the tariff can have one or more different grid service riders, and then there's a contractual agreement for providing those grid services between the customer or the aggregator and the distribution utility. Then after talking about the grid services tariff, the report talks about the export tariff, which is focused on the cost allocation and cost recovery. One of the underlying premises of the report of the export tariff concept in this framework is that utilities either are interested in serving exporting load or they have an obligation to do so. And this motivates them to develop processes that can, for them to serve and plan for exporting facilities and to recover prudent costs. The report focuses on how existing rate-making principles can be used in order to create this export tariff, including grouping export profiles together into customer classes, and using cost causation to categorize and allocate costs within a cost of service model. Two of the aspects of the export tariff that are a shift in thinking are, the first one is that instead of using a cause or pays approach for interconnecting export customers, where if the customer triggers a system upgrade, it's assigned the total system upgrade cost of serving the export facility. In this tariff, all or a portion of the system upgrades are collected through ongoing system charges. And then the other aspect that is a bit different is that the export tariff allows for flexible interconnection, meaning that exporting DERs, their availability varies over time in response to system conditions, and that can allow the export consumers to pay for lower costs and cause fewer costs on the grid. And then the paper concludes with implementation considerations for regulations and utilities. So I believe that I am done with my time, so I'll pass it back to Jeff. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Appreciate it. I know it's challenging for all of you to get such a great amount of resources and detail that you've been able to produce in the short time. So I hope people will have lots of questions for you when we get to the second part of the program. Guillermo, I believe, is up next with his publication.
Thank you, Jeff. So yeah, my name is Guillermo Pereira. I'm going to discuss a report that I worked on with my colleagues, Jeff Deason and Anthony Sandonato. And the report is about unlocking load growth at the grid edge. And in this case, to put it into the context of the wider conversation around load growth, we focused on smaller distributed loads that are collectively significant. Think about electric vehicles or heat pump adoption versus other work that is focusing on data centers. This work is really informed by a detailed review of state practices. We looked at 14 different states to understand what are states and utilities currently doing in terms of cost allocation approaches, cost recovery methods, and managing these costs. And the goal of this is to really provide a detailed landscape review so that decision makers and stakeholders at the state level trying to grapple with different issues on how to invest in the distribution system can leverage this information to inform decision making. And the report is structured in three main parts, and you will see them as different sections when you open it. One of them is around utility programs, predominantly focused on behind-the-meter assets, but not always, sometimes including behind-the-meter or in front-of-the-meter make-ready infrastructure. And for these programs, we identified the cost recovery approaches that are being used. Are programs using riders? Are they using base rates? And what are the justifications for doing that? So we dived into the reasoning of utilities and commissions, and whenever that was available, we brought it into the report to explain the different ways why utilities and regulators may choose for different options. Similarly, with line extension policies, so in this case, really at the intersection of the meter and the grid, we identified the different approaches that utilities have been following. In some cases, utilities are providing greater support when a customer adopts an electric vehicle, when a customer adopts a heat pump or participates in a building electrification program. So we characterize those and we provide a range of different levels of support. And again, it helps you understand what is the way in which cost and responsibilities can be shared between the utility and adopting customers, and how those costs can be split and the reasons for that. And in that section, we also identify the different elements of line extension policy design that decision makers can think about. What are the assets we include? What is the type of allowance and how high can that be? And what are the reasons why we do that? So we provide all those details, and we also identify the pathways for which in which a state or a utility may implement line extension policy reforms. And on the last chapter, we review this growing, emerging field of proactive investments and really understanding how to invest effectively ahead of load, which carries significant uncertainty. And in this case, we review state practices in 7 states, if I'm not mistaken, the current processes where they're at, the types of investments that have been approved or the frameworks they are designing. And we also identify risks and risk mitigation strategies that states may consider as they launch into this field of understanding proactive investments. And I think my time is up, Jeff, so back to you.
Thanks, Guillermo. Appreciate it. Next, we have Paul DiMartini from Newport Consulting Group. He provides a lot of excellent support to the lab through a lot of DOE programs, and we're certainly grateful to have him here with us today. Paul, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity. So what we did, Lisa Schwartz and Jason Ball and I put together was an update to how we think about cost effectiveness evaluation of distribution investments, not just grid modernization, but applicable across all distribution investments. This was informed by outreach that Lisa and Jason did in terms of getting feedback from various members in terms of what's worked and not worked since the first set of frameworks that were put together under the DSPX work, the Modern Distribution Grid Report, Volume 4. The first one was in Volume 3, and then Volume 4, which was released 5 years ago now. So it was time for an update. Synapse had produced a subsequent report that also addressed, in particular, the benefit cost analysis dimension. There was some inherent inconsistencies between the two approaches. And so what we did here was to attempt to clarify and synthesize the feedback as well as the approaches that were put forward. So this paper addresses really 2 things. One, it synthesizes the way that we should think about or should think about the considerations around how to apply cost effectiveness evaluations of distribution, applying both benefit cost analyses and lowest reasonable cost or low best fit least cost approaches for specific type of proposed expenditures, both capital and expense, based on a set of drivers. And we've further articulated a set of drivers here. And then the second part is, as part of an overall process that we describe, is how to address multi-objective prioritization. And this is built on what is emerging in terms of leading practices that are starting to shape up in several states and certainly within several utilities across the country, and starting to emerge in terms of filings that the utilities are making as part of their integrated distribution system plans or their investment plans in terms of how they're thinking about prioritizing certain investments with respect to state policies and local objectives as well. So this paper attempts to capture both. The other thing that we incorporated in this paper, which we didn't really do very well earlier, was provide more clear examples of how to apply the framework to current issues that folks are tackling. For example, how to evaluate an ADMS, investment that's proposed, or elements of an ADMS. And so we unpack that and just discuss how that could be approached. Also, DERMS, a distributed energy resource management solution, how that could be addressed from a benefit cost analysis and exploring that. And then other types of investments that are proposed as relates to different expenditure drivers and how we would suggest considering evaluating them and why you might look at them on an individual basis, either through the lens of a lowest cost, reasonable cost, or through a benefit cost analysis. We also show how, for an overall long-term modernization plan, how you might think about applying a benefit cost analysis while in an individual specific investment, particularly say in the technology space, where you may not apply a benefit cost. You could, as a portfolio over a longer horizon, be able to do a benefit cost analysis to get a better sense of the overall package once all the components were in place, what value might be provided. So we try to provide those examples as well. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it. We're going back to Natalie for one more publication that she worked on. She's obviously been very busy. Thanks, Natalie.
Thanks, Jeff. I will do a better job of staying in my 3 minutes.
It's all good.
Okay, so this last report that I'll talk about is about demand flexibility and moving beyond direct load control. And we created this maturity model based on some technical assistance we did with the state, where they were asking us to help them figure out how to move from their traditional utility administered demand response programs to programs that are more flexible and can be operated more frequently. So it also builds on the idea of maturity models from other or like other segments of the electricity system. California, they have the wildfire maturity matrix, and this builds on that. And there's other ones around cybersecurity and smart grids. And so this is building on top of all of those. So this maturity model has 6 main different categories, which are shown in the top left. And within each one of those categories, there are 5 to 7 different capabilities. And the way that users can implement this is they can look through the different categories and look at the different components or capabilities and then score where their programs are on a scale of 1 to 5. And that's what the graphic on the bottom of the screen shows, is the 1 through 5. And so for each one of the capabilities, a 1 is below expectation and a 5 is an improvement over best practice. And this is a screenshot of the planning and design category, and it's focused on the capability of dispatch strategy. So for below expectation is a rudimentary understanding of current bulk power system needs. So for each one of the categories and capabilities, we have these little descriptions for 1 through 5. And just quickly running through what those categories are. For planning and design, that category focuses on capabilities related to creating demand flexibility programs. Customer engagement is the second category, and it's focused on strategies, tools, and processes that enable utilities to attract and retain demand flexibility program participants. The third category is program operations, and that focuses on capabilities that are necessary to effectively manage ongoing operations of the program. The fourth one is evaluation, measurement, verification, and that one focuses on methodologies and processes that are used to assess the effectiveness of the demand flexibility programs. And then the next one is DER orchestration, and this focuses on the software integration that's related to operating the demand flexibility resources. And then the last one is data infrastructure, and that one focuses on the systems and the processes that are needed to collect, manage, and share the data. One note about this is that you don't have to necessarily progress from one capability to the next. States can use this and modify it as they see fit to maximize the value that they need out of it and advance their demand flexibility programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. That looks like an incredible amount of work. I'm looking forward to looking at that and understanding the different maturity levels for all these different components. A lot of richness there. Our last Berkeley Lab speaker for the afternoon is Sydney Forrester. Sydney, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I worked on this with Brattle and Natalie. And so what we were looking at was more specifically aggregated DERs in wholesale markets. So obviously for Order 2222 has a lot of relevance there. When it came to what we decided to focus in on, just because obviously the state regulator is not within the jurisdiction of FERC or the ISO RTOs. So we were interested mostly in looking at the status of compliance and different sticking points of the ISO RTOs, but only for those requirements that the state regulator has some sort of influence over. So you can see on the right, this is a full list of all of the different requirements that FERC imposed on the ISO RTOs. And there are several that had to, where states have some sort of influence, but it wasn't a super hot topic. And then the ones that are bolded, the 4 that are bolded, double counting of services. So that has to do with dual participation between wholesale and retail markets. Second is metering and telemetry system requirements, which is self-explanatory. The third is the role of the distribution company, and fourth is ongoing operational coordination. And so the third and fourth have to do with the fact that ISO RTOs essentially defer to utilities, to retail utilities, for letting them know, for the role of the distribution company, if a DER is eligible to participate in an aggregation, and in ongoing operational coordination, if a DER is essentially cleared to participate in a call, if they're already in an aggregation. So it's essentially the utility saying, first and foremost, this DER might not agree with local regulations. And then the operational coordination is, if this DER participates in this specific call, it will create reliability issues on the grid. So obviously, because the utility has discretion there, the regulator has an impact just because they can set boundaries as to what might disqualify a DER from participating in the aggregation itself or the call. So anyway, we do go into a lot of detail in the filing, so we couldn't get into everything here. There are examples where they exist for the different states and also the ISO RTOs. And then on the left, just because of time, I'm not going to list everything in here. But what we did was we essentially talked about the role of the state regulator and how it could be leveraged essentially to promote DERs in wholesale markets, or essentially make sure that we go beyond ISO RTO compliance to actual success and seeing DERs actually participate. So for that, we chose coordination, policy and regulation, data collection, evaluation, and sharing. And I'm going to put in the chat a link to register for our webinar. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Sydney. I certainly hope that these short presentations are piquing your interest and interest in joining with the authors to ask them some more detailed questions here in a minute. Our last, but absolutely certainly not least, presenter this afternoon is Jen Downing from DOE's Loan Program Office, talking about the update to the Pathways to Commercial Liftoff for Virtual Power Plants document, which certainly got a lot of attention in its initial incarnation last year. So thanks for being here, Jen.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. And thanks for hosting this forum. We are huge fans of the NARUC-NASEO collaboration and have pointed many people to the resources that you've all created. So I'm Jen Downing. In my current role, I lead business development for our Title 17 loan program at LPO. That includes Energy Infrastructure Reinvestment Program, which many of utilities are applying for or have gotten loans from, and our State Energy Financing Institution Loan Program. So you may know me from that role. But prior to that, I led the DOE team that wrote the original liftoff report in 2023. And I'm standing in for the lead author of the update, which we just published in 2025. So what is a liftoff report real quick? If you're not familiar, it's really a fact base informed by hundreds of interviews with market experts across the private and public sector of what is happening in the market, how big is the opportunity for VPPs, and what are the challenges and solutions to scaling them up for a lower cost, more resilient, reliable grid. Now, I want to be clear that the update to the report really builds on the original. Everything in the original is still true. We explained what is a VPP, why is it valuable, et cetera. And as we engaged people across the market on the findings of the original report, we found that the most helpful thing we could do was to just provide people with examples. And in the 18 months after we published the original, there was just an explosion of examples where, utilities had announced new programs, regulators had announced new dockets, nonprofit organizations, advocacy organizations, even the DOE is putting out more and more resources. And so what we've done is we've kind of taken those and synthesized them into an update where folks can go to find examples and resources. Most of the time, it's kind of a short blurb with a link to where you can learn more. But what we've done in this update is we've taken the 5 imperatives to lift off from the original report and organized over 75 real world case studies across those 5 imperatives. So for example, on simplifying VPP enrollment, we list what utilities are doing to make it seamless for customers to participate. Or better integrate VPPs into wholesale markets. We actually have a lot of overlapping content with the last presenter on what is the status across ISOs and RTOs. Now I want to highlight kind of a couple areas where the liftoff report update goes into more detail that kind of differ from what the other presenters have summarized today. We summarize several of the same themes, but one thing that is new in the update that we haven't seen elsewhere is to really look under the hood of the IT and operational technology configurations of some of the best-in-class virtual power plants on the market today. And I could imagine this audience using that to really understand, hey, how long did it take National Grid to roll out the connected solutions and how much did it cost, right? The answer, 4 months and about $500,000. In contrast, what about Rocky Mountain Power? They're with their battery virtual power plant. It took them 3 years and about $5 million upfront. And in our report, in the appendix, you can actually take a look at the technological underpinnings of what they paid for, right? How the communication systems work, what the grid services are that they're getting, how the customer incentives are structured. And there's a ton of really rich detail in the appendix on that topic, as well as across the 5 imperatives that we outlined. There's also a bunch of new data from across the market. You can kind of see on the snippets that we have on this slide here about just overall what's happening state by state with VPP deployment, some actual VPP performance data from, for example, the chart that you can see in the middle is from Weave Grid's managed charging program, and then lots of action across state energy offices and commissions that we're really excited to share and summarize. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jen. Really outstanding work. Excuse me. So as we've indicated, you now have an opportunity to join a breakout room with any one of these authors. Some of them will be grouped together in a room. There's the list of the folks where they'll be and which reports they are talking about in case you need help remembering. You are welcome to spend as much time or as little time in any of the rooms as you like. You can move around, listen to the questions being asked, ask your own questions. We're not going to record any of this. This is just really for you, our participants and our members, to get as much out of these experts as we can in the time we have available. So I believe the rooms are about to be opened. There they are. You should be able to locate a room and choose where to go. You don't have to keep listening to me if you're ready to go. And of course, we will keep an eye on this main room. And in case you need any assistance, you can message myself, you can message Danielle through the chat function of Zoom, and we can help you get organized to your spot. We'll do this for the next 40 minutes or so, and then we'll come back together and we'll do a little recap and close up and hear about some next steps. We'll send some reminders along the way as well, so you don't forget.